So I'd like to welcome everyone to talk 14 in the Spectrum Scale User Group Expert Talk series. So today's talk is what's new in Spectrum Scale 5.1.1. Can I have the next slide, please? So we've been running a series of online digital events through 2020 and in 2021. This is our first event of this year. All of our talks are available on the Spectrum Scale User Group website. So we've got videos from most of the talks and all of the slide decks are there as well. Next slide, please. So if you don't know about the Spectrum Scale User Group, we are an independent group, but we do work very closely with IBM to develop events. In the past, we've done a lot of in-person events. That's obviously not been possible for a number of reasons in the last year. The user group has an email and a Slack community. We do encourage you to post questions, interact with your peers on both the mailing list or on Slack. But it's not a replacement for a PMR with IBM. So if you've got a system down, the user group's not the best place to go. We suggest you go and log a support ticket with IBM. Although there's lots of people on there who will answer questions, please do take part in the community. Next slide, please. So the user group, so I'm Simon Thompson, so I'm the host for today's session. We also have Christy, Bob, and Bill based in the US who help coordinate events over in the US. And Chris, who's coordinating events in Australia as well. And we're all IBM champions, which means we're recognized for our contribution to the community. Next slide, please. So we've got a list of all of the talks that we've been doing over the past year and a bit. As I mentioned, all of the slides are on there. At the moment, we're just coordinating the dates for the next few talks. We do have some more talks planned. We just haven't finalized dates yet. So please check the mailing list or on Slack. Or on the website where we'll post details of the upcoming talks. Next slide, please. So today's speakers, we have Chris. Chris is an executive architect for IBM in file and object storage, and he's worked there for over 20 years. And we also have Ismail, who's one of the Spectrum Scale development team based in Mexico. Before we go into today's talk, though, I'd like to welcome Carl Zeity, who's product offering manager for Spectrum Scale, who's just going to give a little introduction as well.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, this is Carl. I've been the lead product manager on Spectrum Scale for about 5 years now, and I'm very happy to see that our what's new in releases have become such a regular cadence. We're now turning them out twice a year with great regularity. I also want to take the opportunity to introduce a new face on the call. Tom O'Brien, excuse me, is going to be taking over leadership of the Spectrum Scale product team in the middle of the year. He and I are right now in an extended handoff as I wind down for retirement. Congratulations, Tom, and everybody on the user group, be nice to him.
Thanks, Carl, and thanks also for your contributions you've given us over the past few years as well. It's I think it's certainly been valued by people at the user group, both at the in-person events and online, to be able to ask you questions and to get candid kind of responses from you. And we hope Tom is going to engage with us in a very similar way as well. So I think we're done for kind of introductions. So I'll hand over to Chris. I think is going to start off today's talk.
Simon, and we can again, there's a standard legalese. We don't do 5 or 6 slides anymore, but yeah, I mean, we'll miss Carl, as he's going. But again, I can assure you in my discussions with Tom, he is straightforward and to the point as well. So he's very upfront as well. So good hand up, but we'll hopefully still be able to see folks soon enough. So today's talk in 5.1.1, we sort of released a couple of weeks ago. If we sort of go to the next slide, Ismail, we'll basically sort of see the featured updates. So, enhanced integration and deployment features within containers, right? Sort of telling the story of container storage interface, container native storage access, and what we sort of did last year. Improved network performance for Rocky and TCP/IP-based configurations. It's been a sore sticking point in terms of configuration for Rocky, but also in terms of if I want to run on regular Ethernet, can I, easily use all the bandwidth and be more efficient about that? And then enhanced DevOps installation and upgrade experiences, right? I kind of, got my hands dirty with GPFS a long time ago, and you sort of, the standard RPM or, the make world, right, to sort of build your modules, and we've come a long way since, right? The DevOps installation experience. And I think, like I said, we've done with Ansible is really very progressive in what we're doing in this space. GPU direct storage technology, as basically a tech preview, we basically have here. We've been validating and working hand in hand with NVIDIA in Spectrum Scale, GPU direct storage, with NVIDIA solutions as well. So we'll sort of talk a little bit about that. And then finally, immutability compliance. This is something that we have gone through certifications on, typically for a lot of the releases in Spectrum Scale. You know, again, immutability here at IBM, you know, to some of you knowing it as, you know, worm, write once, read many, essentially having that kind of compliance when I need to keep data for a certain amount of time and not even, you know, root can delete it. And lastly, also looking at, again, the technology integrations we've been working with here at IBM with Cloudera, you know, NVIDIA, of course, but also with OpenShift and Red Hat. So kind of kicking it off to the next slide, which, you know, as Carl sort of said, we've been doing releases of Spectrum Scale. And as we hit the next slide here, Ismail, we'll basically be able to see, you know, the last March, or I think it was March or April, we sort of gave a discussion on what we're trying to do with lifetimes of, you know, various releases. 4.2.3 is, you know, gone with the wind. Essentially with 5.0.5 that we talked about last year, it's an extended update support release. You know, that basically gives you 2 years of life for that cycle. And again, what we've been doing with these releases, and like I said, very, you know, good props to the development team and the product management team is sort of having this cycle and sort of living to that. You know, 5.1.0 came out last October. We gave a talk on that. 5.1.1, here we are today. And it's just kind of just giving everyone a stopping, you know, kind of point. And as you're sort of seeing here, the lifetime, you know, technically the release that we're planning for this next, this fall would be another extended update support release, right? So, you know, you're sort of seeing this now, you know, what we sort of said, putting, you know, pen to paper, we're sort of doing that with the releases, allowing us to sort of test things a lot easier. A new Red Hat distribution, a new Linux distribution comes out. You know, usually we've been really good about pulling that testing into that release, you know, within 6 weeks, you know, in kind of the test cycles. So it's been good. The Spectrum Scale team has really done a wonderful job in these releases. So here we are today at 5.1.1.
So Chris, can I just forgot to mention to everybody, there's a Q&A box. So if you want to ask questions of the speaker, please post your questions in the Q&A box. So we've got a panel of IBM people online as well who might respond to some of those questions, or we can ask the speaker as well. So please do feel free to ask questions.
Yes, thank you, Simon. All right, so next slide. Like I said, we want to sort of go and talk to, you know, container native storage access. This was, we mentioned it last fall, right? It wasn't fully released. We were doing some betas, and, you know, I was kind of involved with some clients where we were deploying this, and, you know, Spectrum Scale containers, right? You know, and as we kind of, you know, talk about Linux Linux containers, Docker, what we were doing there, all that progression, you know, that we've sort of presented in the past is still there. So today, you know, Spectrum Scale containers really with container native storage access really implies using Red Hat OpenShift container platform, OCP, and having Spectrum Scale run within that deployment environment, right? And I still remember actually at the user group in the UK, I think it was in 2019, you know, sort of talking to Wayne and sort of thinking about the PC, where we're going with containers and trying to have Spectrum Scale run in a read-only OS like Red Hat Core OS, right? So we sort of, you know, got that done at the end of last year. It allows Spectrum Scale to run on worker nodes that are running this Core OS and flavor, right, in a containerized environment, and be able to be deployed easier. So if we go to the next slide, we'll sort of talk through the ability, right? We released in the December. We've already had an update. So what do you do when you do updates here? Well, make sure you can upgrade from one to the other, right? So being able to upgrade, right? You know, I had to sort of take it, you know, downtimes or, you know, sort of understanding the challenges that are presented, right? And then usually in an MVP, you know, kind of an initial product that you come out with it, and then you're bringing other features to it. So right off that bat, when we did CNSA, people ask about, well, how about Red Hat OpenShift Container Platform 4.6? Well, of course, now we have 7. You know, we have that. Of course, the next question is, how about 4.7? Or what are you doing with 4.8? So the team's doing a good job trying to cadence with the OCP versions that are sort of coming out there. the operator maintaining status and creates on what's going on of the Spectrum Scale cluster in that environment. Certificate support within how the GUI is, or REST API is communicating amongst the CNSA environment to the storage. And really what's important here is that deployment functionality for container native storage access, whether it's x86, whether it's Power, or whether it's Z, it's the same kind of deployment experience, right? So you're having a common OCP platform on each of these types of architectures, and the way you're doing Spectrum Scale CNSA is the same on, on these types of architectures. There's no difference, right? That's really important here, where you're not doing something different to install scale for containers in various kinds of architectures. If we go to the next slide, essentially we'll sort of see that, how does that containerized, storage environment work within OCP, right? You see your Spectrum Scale cluster there. That compute cluster is being spun up. You're having all of the various, environments there to be able to provide access to the applications running via our container storage interface driver, so CSI. So you have the Spectrum Scale container native, clients inside here talking to CSI, talking essentially to a storage environment that could be, again, on Power, on x86, on Z. So it could be on different block storage. It's software defined, right, where you can put Spectrum Scale. It's going to be an elastic storage system. So you're just going to do a cross-cluster mount of that environment. And like I said, it's very interesting because I've been privy to some of the performance testing we've been doing on raw testing and, with Spectrum Scale kind of run this way, and raw block device testing with a mainframe, right, talking to a DS8K, right, and an application like DB2. And we're pretty much on par with block level kind of performance, right, in that. So it's been really good. I think we've done, again, a really outstanding job in the architecture here to ensure running in a container is going to give you that near level, bare metal performance here. If we go to the next slide, we can sort of talk about, there's the whole container native storage access, right? But CSI, the container storage interface, that's something we released at the end of 2019. And we sort of came out with 1.0 then, right? So now we are on 2.2.0. So we open sourced this, it's in GitHub that you can sort of see. We've been taking since this were Kubernetes and Red Hat OpenShift kind of environments where clients have used our CSI driver running Ubuntu worker nodes or Red Hat worker nodes, right, in that environment and standard Kubernetes and having that environment there. So this is, our CSI driver interface. This is basically available regardless of the worker node. If I'm not running Red Hat OpenShift, I have CSI here. And, we're sort of cadencing here. What's been happening here, is snapshot support. So the whole CSI community was wondering how is actually that going to be done in this environment, right? And, finally standardizing on that. We actually had an idea in the code of how that was going to flow. We didn't turn it on. We sort of want to make sure that was officially supported by the community before we did that. But again, making CSI easier to use with each release as well. That's kind of been the calling card. And the next slide, we can sort of talk to, this whole experience of whether it's Power, whether it's Z, whether it's mainframe, in the Red Hat OpenShift environment and using containers, right, really led us to have a nice common installation framework. And again, I've been a fan of what we've done in the installation toolkit. It was chef-based, right, and sort of running that. But the migration to doing Ansible playbooks here at IBM within Spectrum Scale, within the elastic storage systems, within Red Hat, and sort of what they sort of done was important, a more important step for what we're doing in Spectrum Scale and, container native storage access using that as well. As we talk about cloud deployments, really making that easier as well. And just a nice, open playbook that you can sort of run. So we've done that migration to Ansible for the installation toolkit. It's going to allow us to scale up and be a lot faster in sort of doing that. Again, these are improvements. We first pivot from Chef to Ansible, and then now sort of do how you can do optimizations and improvements over time. Support, again, out of the gate, for, cluster export services, IPv6. I don't know if some of you were participating on the beta program, but, as I was sort of cadencing with the betas in my cloud environment or on my, on-prem, you know, that this was great to see, right? To sort of see this kind of new feature that's there. And in the next slide, we can basically see, you know, what are we doing here? In terms of, you know, Ansible, all of the code we've had, right? Just like the CSI driver, we've had in GitHub, right? GitHub, IBM, Spectrum Scale, install infra. The naming there, I don't know how it's all infrastructure. I get it, but again, this is where the you know, playbooks we've been sort of putting out there for that. We again pivoted away from the chef-based toolkit we were using, really to think about scaling to a greater number of nodes that are sort of working on here. Configuration management, you know, we're not using Ruby anymore with Chef, using Ansible, you know, yet another markup language, YAML, cluster configuration file. This is if you've ever done Spectrum Scale config populate and give it a node name, which is actually really cool. By the way, it'll give it a node name. It'll go discover what you have in your cluster, and actually, if you've never used the install toolkit, you know, it'll actually create this file. So that configuration file is now stored in JSON format, you know, kind of a standard kind of format there. And now, again, in terms of how we're doing communication with the installation, it's more efficient, just a single SSH rather than bootstrapping stuff within Chef and kind of the duct tape work we were sort of doing there. And then again, moving our cluster definition file to that's JSON based now to an Ansible toolkit location, and deprecating things that we weren't really using or seeing being used that much, like, you know, NTP and auth configuration. Maybe, you know, there's no need to sort of worry about that. We'll sort of, you know, that's common practice that you're sort of doing as well. If we go to the next slide.
We've got a couple of questions about containers. So the first one was about CNSA rolling upgrades, which I think Ted's just updated in the second half of the year. And then there was a second question around, do you have configuration examples for DS8K, ZOS, OpenShift, and Spectrum Scale?
Thank you, Simon, and thank you to the other Simon for asking that question, Prince and Simon. So essentially, yes, we do have some configuration parameters, and Ismail has kind of been doing a lot of the work in the Z kind of environment. So we can sort of, again, maybe kind of find that configuration example and kind of post it, whether it's to the user group mailing list or, like I said, connect with you as well offline. But we do have configuration examples with DS8K and ZOS. Z Linux. ZOS, like I said, and that's an important kind of thing, is ZOS is not running the Scale client, right? It's actually running ZOS that's going to talk to Spectrum Scale, usually to NFS, and Ismail will talk a little bit about that. Anything else there, Simon?
So there was another question about Ansible support. Do you have any plans for dropping support of manual installation? Will Ansible become the only supported way of installing Spectrum Scale?
That's a great question. And like I said, you can always rest assured the development team, and, you know, what we always do is, if you're used to one way of installing Scale, doing RPM minus IDH or doing depackage minus I, stuff like that, you can still do that. That never goes away. You're always able to do the installation of the environment the way you've sort of been used to. That's the key thing. Is what the last thing we want to do is, if you're kind of doing a certain installation experience today, you know, breaking that for you, you're not going to be very happy with us. So all of that stuff still works. You can still do make world. You can still build everything by hand if you want. Again, this is just an easier way to sort of think about it, you know, in doing the deployment, seeing those playbooks, be more open in how we think you should actually install. But we're not taking away doing RPM minus IDH or doing create repo and doing all of that yourself. That still is there if you like to do that. Good question.
Thanks. There are a couple more questions. I wonder if one of the sort of IBM team can pick those up. They're about sort of future things, I think, rather than it kind of, or we can pick them up at the end as well.
Excellent. Great. So again, you know, the next slide here, Ismail, we'll sort of move on. So Ansible, in terms, again, what we were doing with Spectrum Scale, in terms of containers, in terms of cloud, in terms of, again, at the command line for your regular bare metal or virtual machine environments you have as well. These playbooks are there. Elastic Storage Systems, they've actually been using it as well for installation, for configuration, for upgrading, you know, doing regular operations of the file system of protocols. AFM is coming and sort of how that works, right? But you'll see the playbooks come, setting up the GUI, call home kind of configuration that you want to do, and then as well as our, integration points with, for example, with name node services within the cluster export services as well. Great. So then, good. Then we'll go to the next slide. So another feature we have here in the 5.1.1 is GPU direct storage, right? Sort of working with Spectrum Scale with NVIDIA. RDMA-based networking, right, is something we, in the HPC world, that we've all seen where, trying to not use the CPU for doing the communication and sort of offloading it to the network, right, to sort of get that job done, right? InfiniBand kind of technology is doing that. And I'm trying to date myself here with their MirrorNet and Quadrix, like I said, having your own kind of drivers that were there as well, and kind of that communication path, right? So we saw it with InfiniBand, we are, seeing it hopefully with RDMA over converged Ethernet kind of deployments as well. But now with GPUs, we're sort of saying, this kind of hops into CPUs, having GPUs basically talk directly to the storage, to Spectrum Scale, to talk to the network device and make that call, right? So, we've done this in 5.1.1 as a technology preview. So you actually can, experiment with GPU direct storage and our tech preview. It does require NVIDIA's GDS SDK, which is, again, currently in beta in this kind of mindset. And again, you're basically you're going to code, right, make a direct memory call within the CUDA commands that you're doing and maybe bypass the CPU and system memory, right? So again, as with anything, right, your mileage may vary. You got to think about your application. I was actually going to take advantage of that. But, we're here as a tech preview. We're here kind of playing and talking to this in the game. And we sort of go to the next slide.
So, Chris, is there anything required from the Spectrum Scale side to enable GDS, or you just have to run 5.1.1 and load the kernel module for the NVIDIA?
Yeah, perfect question, Simon. It was leading into the next slide, so we just go to that real quick. And Ismail. And so essentially, yes, what is it that you sort of need to do? You do have to have Spectrum Scale 5.1.1. That's where the tech preview is at, right? The GPUs and the OS kind of environments, again, 8.3, Ubuntu. I know 8.4 came out. We're doing testing against that, right now, right, and how that actually can work. Supported networks of InfiniBand, and MoFed releases. Spectrum Scale, again, has to be running 5.1.1. The GDS release that's out there as well. To work with us, like I said, we have the NVIDIA, documentation, but also just reach out to scale@us.ibm.com. And again, we'll work with you in the tech preview, if that makes sense, Simon. All right.
Yeah, that's great.
Good. So then next slide. So Spectrum Scale, other core improvements that I think, like I said, is kind of a long-standing. We just got to talk about GPU direct storage, doing RDMA calls and not doing TCP/IP calls. But there are a lot of configurations of Spectrum Scale using 25, 100 gigabit Ethernet, 40 as well, and some clouds still run 10 gigabit as well. Sort of doing that. So it really being efficient about the network utilization you have when you're doing TCP/IP, it's important. And this is a long-standing conversation we've had over many coffees, teas, beers, cocktails, right? Single socket from, a client to the server in the TCP/IP communication being kind of a factor that we needed to enhance. So the good news is, like I said, we've actually done that enhancement to really be able to open up multiple connections over TCP/IP as you're sort of running in that thread. And, again, fully utilize that network, right? With a much less amount of clients that you sort of would need normally to sort of hit the bandwidth you normally would use. So this will help, and sort of also if, a lot of the times we were doing in the code is, a retry on TCPs if things got, hung. It's like, hey, try one more time. Maybe, the socket just got jammed. This is a little bit the work being done here is to be more parallel, and again, the multiple socket kind of connections, where if there is kind of trouble, could I fail over? Could I try another socket? And again, be more resilient on these, Ethernet networks that again are, a lot more higher latency than an InfiniBand network a lot of the times. If we kind of go to the next slide, we'll kind of give you the configuration parameters in sort of what you're doing here, right? So max TCP cons per node con, right? is essentially the configuration. By default, it's 2 when you sort of will install, right? And again, you can change this. I will give you guidance. Really, if you have a large cluster, change it to 8. And it's probably not a good idea. My goal always with anything in Spectrum Scale is to test and validate, right? By 2, sort of see how that's going. I have, like I said, my IBM cloud environment where I have 4 NSDs right in the client, right? I've kind of been messing around with 8, 4, 1, and on 10 gigabit Ethernet, where is that kind of value, right? It's more efficient. A single client can actually push a lot more data, right? So that it's doing the right kind of job. But, don't just say, Chris said to set it to 8 on everywhere on my 512 node cluster and it's going to be great. No, don't say that. So experiment. This is the configuration value. I'll give you kind of guidance that based on what I've seen, track record on the development team and product management, the kind of guidance I said is like with quality of service, for example. We came out with quality of service. We came out with some tunables for large clusters. And now we do auto tuning on, quality of service for large clusters. So probably you'll see a similar path or thought process being worked on within development, right? Here's the initial variable. You can actually set it. By default, it's going to be 2. Your clusters, you basically have to make sure that the nodes are running at 511 on both sides, right? To sort of make sure that you're able to work with this new feature, right? So that's there. And again, it's a great improvement that I've seen in standard TCP/IP connections. Let's see here. Big data and analytics. I do see a question from, hey, Coombs, sort of saying any functionality compatibility issues for Spectrum Scale 511 on the client cluster. Actually, I'm working with Vijay on that right now, Coombs, so we're doing some testing on that. Stay tuned on that and kind of that Windows testing and Linux testing for a client. So just some feedback on that. I saw that question pop up. So the default, again, connections will be 2. Max TCP cons per node con is going to be 2 in that question. All right. So other topics, because we want to make sure that Ismail has time as well. Big data and analytics. Again, we've been doing Cloudera Data Platform, CDP. We've been doing Hadoop, Hortonworks, right? But we were kind of the first certification of that whole Hadoop kind of environment with Cloudera last December. We've been cadencing again with their versions of CDP environments that are coming up there, making it easier to deploy your name nodes within the Ansible toolkit, working on performance improvements, right, with our various versions coming out of HDFS transparency layers that are out there. So those are still going on. There's some bigger improvements that are coming, but again, every release we sort of try to focus a little bit on that, so those are still there. And we sort of can go to the next slide and talk about the other, again, security, working with encryption, being able to deploy this a lot easier than Lambari that's sort of there. So this is really what we've kind of been doing with HDFS all along, back to the days of Big Insights, and again, open source Hadoop, Hortonworks, and again with Cloudera, right, in their various kind of connections. So making that easier. Again, the story here, Ansible playbooks, making things easier to deploy in terms of these kind of integrations within OpenShift, within Cloudera, and using NVIDIA, for example, as well. So we're gonna pass it over to Ismail to sort of talk a little bit from the other great features that we have in Spectrum Scale.
So Chris, one quick question. So somebody's asked, what's the max TCP cons per node setting? What's the default for that? Sorry.
The default is 2, Simon, sorry.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Hello, everyone. Hopefully you can hear me. So along with all these features for containers, deployment, BDNA, and the performance improvements provided by GDS and MCOT that Chris just mentioned to us, Spectrum Scale comes with substantial enhancements at core level to provide you a stronger stability, performance, simplify the cluster management process. One of these enhancements is the Afm Dr Immutability. The basic idea behind immutable storage is that data storage will remain completely static, okay? So it enables adopters to designate the specific data that will be stored in a form that will never change. They will never alter or remove it. So for a scale, by enabling the integrated archive manager IAM mode to on, we can set two flags. The first one is immutability, and the second one is append only. To make immutable AFMDR primarily and secondarily file sets. Okay, so this can be done over a single file or over a directory in an AFMDR file set. So if we set the immutability flag over of a file or a directory, this cannot be changed or renamed. Okay, so we can see the difference between the two flags is the privilege that you will get over the items that you are making immutable. So for immutability flag, the file or directory cannot be changed or renamed. On the other hand, if we have the append only flag over a file or a directory, we can do append operations over this item, but we cannot delete, modify, or rename over this particular item. So in case of both flags are stopped, always the higher precedence is for immutability flag. So immutability takes effect in this case. So this is available, or this was available for normal file sets, but not for AFM DR file sets in previous versions. So we think that with this, you can enhance your recovery and security process, ensuring a stronger data consistency. So for file audit logging, it also comes with a very useful enhancement that allows to consult file audit logging logs by applying filters. Okay. In previous versions, you were able to parse the entire logs to a JSON file. However, you were not able to filter them. So using Audit Parcel tool now, you can search for specific information, extract the data into a JSON format, and analyze it. For example, you can search particular events, node name, cluster names, and any other logging attribute that you have in mind. In the slides, for example, we can see two samples of logging parsing. The first one retrieves the full set of records of the log, and the second one applies filters over the attribute events, retrieving just a subset of such records. And finally, we have the third example that shows how these results are parsed and structured into JSON format. This for sure will help you to conduct faster analysis on your file audit logging data, not only within your Spectrum Scale environment, but as it is in a standard format, you can take it out and use any external tool that can help you to do faster analysis and obtain the results that you want in a more flexible way. Spectrum Scale 511 also comes with new features that provide simpler and more flexible ways to administrate your system. For example, now it is possible to designate a node as a performance monitoring collector when you are adding it. So that means that you don't need extra steps. Just add the node, and at the same time, you can do the designation using the add node command. Okay. Also, using the backup server from opt, there is an option that comes in the DSM opt file. You can specify the IBM Spectrum Protect server to be used as a backup during the backup process. So without the need to specify it with the parameter named DSM server options. Okay, so this makes you simpler the execution of the backup command, since you don't have to recall each time the servers to be used in the execution of the command. You have already configured in the DSM opt file, so you can take it directly from there without the need of specifying each time you are executing this. Of course, if you provide the TSM service list during the execution of the backup command, this will take it will be the first priority. So the TSM service options will be taken as the first option. And if you don't provide it, of course, it's going to look at the DSM opt file. Another important improvement is that now you can get more information on your file system in regards to inode. Using the mmdf command, you can know the inode capacity and usage of your file system. For doing this, there are two principal conditions. The first one is the parameter quota needs to be disabled, and the file set df parameter needs to be enabled. Also, it is possible to create a stronger password in the key store password with keyserve by adding a limited set of special characters. In previous releases, we don't have this set of special characters, so now we are adding this, and this provides a stronger password creation to enhance the security of your cluster. Spectrum Scale 501 also comes or introduce new features that allow you to improve the resource utilization and simplify the process of problem determination. For example, now Spectrum Scale supports ROCI with multiple aliases per RDMA adapter. This gives you the plenty of flexibility to configure complex ROCI environments. Simply define the multiple aliases that you have, and Spectrum Scale will do a dynamic pairing of these IPs within the same network. Okay, with Scale 511 also, we can use the MISC attribute, the misalignment attribute, to filter these particular files with expressions, or we can use this MISC attribute to filter with SQL expressions, which but to say that the file is contains or could be contained in the inode space. Okay, so identifying these particular files will help you to do a better resource planning and enhance your storage configuration allocation. For example, if a file is 3 KB, which is less than the default inode size, the file can be completely contained in the inode. So having this in mind, you can plan accordingly, configure your Spectrum Scale accordingly, and obtain better performance, better allocation in your cluster. The local read-only cache has been increased to 4 terabytes in Spectrum Scale 511. This means more capacity to improve your read performance. And more exciting news for LROC is that it has been integrated with Health diagnostic tool. So this improvement allows you to know the status of the LROC in a very simple and faster way. So just do Health diagnostic tool, and you will know which is the status of your LROC component. Something that is fundamental and to increase the mechanisms for error handling and cluster status awareness. Spectrum Scale 511 comes with new features that provides support in these matters. For example, Spectrum Scale 511 introduced a warning that helps you to avoid accidental deletion of a node that has been designated initially as a performance monitor collector. So no more accidental losing of your performance stats. Other important addition on error handling is the introduction of the parameter pit continuous on error that allows commands such as change disk, restripe, del file set, del snapshot to continue running after a parallel inode traverse or pit occurs. So the more important is that at the end of the execution, you will have a file with the full list of faulty files. So in previous versions, you are notified that a file got an error during the pit phase. So you have to recover the file and try again. So if more files are presenting errors at the pit phase, you have to iterate until you recover all the files to complete the command. Okay. So now you can complete the command and get the list of a full list of faulty files at once. So it simplifies, I think, tremendously your error handling, particular in this case of parallel inode based phase. Something similar happens with the on error continue option of the add node and del node command. If you have invalid nodes in your list of nodes to add or delete, it identifies such invalid nodes automatically and remove them from the list. And finally, it completes the command. So in previous versions, you had to identify and manually delete these invalid nodes from the list. Okay, now let's talk about performance. In terms of performance, Spectrum Scale 511 introduced improvements on file system utilities at a network level to maximize your system utilization. Okay, Spectrum Scale 511 allows RDMA to NUMA binding. On NUMA systems, no uniform memory access can causes higher latency NC, bandwidth, and bottlenecks, leading to performance degradation. The RDMA adapters are normally distributed across the platform NUMA nodes. However, the operating system scheduler is not aware of this, of the process or threads that are actually driving the adapter. And also, the thread that is driving the adapter might not be or could be in a different NUMA node than the actual adapter that is making the call. So this creates a lot of cross-node memory access. Okay, so from 511, Spectrum Scale automatically binds the RDMA adapter device to port threads to set the CPU belongings to the same NUMA node to which the adapter is actually connected. This binding reduces significantly the cross-node memory access and therefore the bandwidth bottlenecks. So the benefit for this is only observable in systems with more than one NUMA node. So this makes sense since this benefit is taken from reducing this cross-node memory access. So we can do that, for example, in these P9 system clusters that provide this functionality. Another important addition to scale performance in 511 are faster mechanisms to calculate the amount of storage used by Snapshot. So with lower performance impact to your day-to-day operation, you can obtain this particular unuseful piece of data using the MML snapshot, -D, and -fast. In Scale 511, we are also introducing a new tool that can help us to map the inode to the path files. Administrative commands such as mmfsck or mmrestrictfs report errors against inode numbers. Okay, these inodes are normally required to be mapped to a path of a file or directory to take action like backing up or restoring such files by the system administrator. Previous tool was called TS finite node, can run only on a single node and takes very long time to run on deeply nested large file systems with billions of files. So the new MM5 node tools is based on the scale policy framework. So it means that it can run in parallel. And in the test that we have conducted, it shows X time faster than the previous tool.
So Ismail, there's a question around MMLS snapshot -D. That is it reasonable to run it every minute, for instance? How fast is it?
Yeah, it's okay. You cannot do it every minute. Okay, it reduced significantly the bottleneck or the overhead produced that in previous MML snapshot command, but not for running it every minute. For say that. Okay, we can say that 50% reduction of the performance has been achieved, but it's not something to play with like doing something like that.
Okay, thanks, Ismail.
Okay, for this system, Spectrum Scale 511, now it's possible to set up theme provisioning with Spectrum virtualized hardware, such as B7000. Within provisioning storage space, of course, can be optimized by allocating space on demand and reclaiming it when the application using it or using a particular volume declares it's no longer used in a given block of data. So for the Spectrum Scale for C also comes with a wider support for COS NFS clients, including Red Hat 7 and 8, SUSE Linux 12 and 15, and COS version 2. So now you have a wider set of options to deploy your NFS clusters on C environments. Important security improvements has been introduced also in 511. So for example, multi-factor authentication for GUI users. So more than providing user name and password, users are now validated using additional mechanisms such as code sent to phone, for example, or emails. This means a stronger security for your system. This only works for GUI users that are registered to the IBM Cloud Identify Verify repository, or CIV. Using the GUI, now you can define a number of failed login attempts. So you can make a lot of configurations in relation to the security. So for example, this number of failed login attempts, maximum duration after which a user account is locked, also the session timeout. So this can be done only by users with security administration privileges.
Okay, there it goes. Sorry,
yep.
the slide just updated, Ismail. Go ahead.
Additionally, it's not possible to enable last login details, providing awareness of user access and therefore additional security insights. So now you, in one single place, can do all the configuration of these parameters, and finally strengthen the security of the overall environment in the GUI. It's not responding. Okay, is there? So the measurement GUI has been enhanced with new features that provide more flexible configuration and simpler utilization. These enhancements include that now it's possible to configure the user password to never expire. Now you decide to periodically change your password or not. Using the GUI, now you can configure the way that the available quota or data storage in the file systems are displayed. So you can customize at your convenience the way to observe your storage data. You can also configure the number of API requests that can be queued in 1 second. So this still is very helpful to eliminate the occurrences of denial of service events due to exhausted resources. Just size your requests, size your capacity, and then adjust the parameter. So snapshots creation and deletion in batch mode is also being introduced in Spectrum Scale 511 GUI. With this tool, you can simplify the way to create and delete your snapshots. So this can help you to automate your administration tasks. And something important also to mention in this particular feature is that although it is very helpful and is very powerful, it should not be taken also as a toy, as you don't want to create a massive amount of snapshots as the same as we mentioned before. So take it with caution, use it accordingly your needs. But yeah, it's very powerful, helps you a lot to automate it, but you have to be or measure the way you are using it. Okay, for the case of the management API, the security has also been enhanced with the implementation of endpoint-based authorization. The access to the REST APIs now needs to be defined at the user group level with the help of the definition of ACLs. So users belonging to a specific user group can access to REST APIs based on the privileges that are defined with those ACLs. Okay. So, for example, if there is no any ACL defined, the default access for the whole set of users is going to be allowed. However, if there is any ACL created, no matter for what user group has been created, the access by default is then denied. Consequently, the user is not only authorized to consume a certain endpoint, just if there is at least one allow permission that applies to his user group, and there is not one explicit deny permission. So this significantly strengthens the access to the REST APIs. API also comes with another enhancement to get information to the storage pool as well as the endpoints for snap handling. So in summary, for API in 511, we have new endpoints to get more information on your storage, as well as more flexible mechanisms to administer your snapshot with a stronger security. Regarding to system health and monitoring, now you have enhanced awareness on the status of your system components. For example, now it is possible to monitor and modify the health monitoring services status per node using the health configure monitor command. So there is a simple way to verify, pause, and also to resume the monitoring service per node. With the health command, now it's possible to monitor the status of the local cache, as we have mentioned before. So as well as the monitoring of your encryption services. So now you have more components of your cluster that are now integrated to the monitoring service, providing you stronger awareness. Spectrum Scale 511 comes with added security mechanisms to control also who can see the performance of your performance stats. So using mmperform config command and the API key parameter, you can define, list, delete, modify API keys to control the access to the querying interface. Home continues growing, and 511 is not the exception. More information is being collected to help you in the diagnosis of system issues or simply to improve your performance. Okay, for example, new data sets such as Hadoop configurations, InfiniBand informations, and home hardware. This is just the case for EMS nodes are now being collected. But now, not only the data collection has been enhanced, the actual documentation of the collected data has also improved, providing more detail on what and how the data is being collected. A new tool also has been introduced. It is being called MN Netmetrics. And what it does is sample CPU, socket, network, and performance from InfiniBand. And now we have the options to use this particular tool to plot this data using Home to be used for further diagnosis. Spectrum Scale Erasure Code Edition, or ECE, also comes with significant enhancements in 511 releases. These enhancements look to extend the capabilities of your ECE cluster by adding storage scaling mechanisms and network optimizations. Spectrum Scale 511 adds support for the scale up by adding new disks to ECE nodes. It also allows to add space to a particular file system by creating and automatically adding BDisk to a file system in a scale-out mode. So ECE helps you to start small and scale up gradually to grow your ECE system. In Scale 511, it's possible to integrate AMD EPYC with PCI Express Gen 4 and Mellanox Connect XC. So the PCI Gen 4 supports delivery substantial system performance improvements by doubling the bandwidth available to the storage. Networking and other peripherals compared to CPUs that only support the generation 3 of PCI Express. So on the other hand, AMD EPYC processors also offer more PCI Express lanes, support for adding more DRAM capacity, allowing to provide more industry highest PCI Express bandwidth, for example, and memory capacity. So Mellanox is taking advantage of all of this, and with this particular configuration can offer up to 200 gigabytes per second for InfiniBands and HDR and Ethernet connectivity. So achieving more or less up to 200 million messages per second. This is a very good ECE addition to improve the performance of your systems. ECE, as has been mentioned previously, also includes support for MCOD, and this, of course, provides enhancements of the network utilization, failover, and, of course, the utilization of multiple TCP/IP connections. ECE in 511 also comes with improvement to simplify the installation and cluster management. These improvements include, first, the installation automation with Ansible, the simplification of BDisk and file system creation. Now, using the Spectrum Scale install, we can do this for ECE too, and also the support of multiple recovery groups. Scale 511 PTF for ECE supports the addition of multiple nodes at the same time in the scale-out mode. This helps you to reduce the time when growing a cluster, as well the data movement that is required during this particular maintenance action. So now you can add all the nodes at the same time, reduce this data movement, and increase the size of your cluster. Also in PTF1, ECE introduced a small clustered arrays with minimal of 4 disks, which are optimized for small recovery groups, and add support for Red Hat 8.4. On the side of protocols, SMB is upgraded to version 4.13, which is upgraded to use Python 3 and add some new functions. For example, by setting up the wide links parameter, you decide to follow or not seams link outside of the shared path. This normally is blocked for security reasons, but in some cases and in trusted systems, you would use external seams links for simplified data access. Okay, SMB now uses Active Directory for authentication. So this makes more transparent the authentication configuration process. Now, Windows or Mac clients can join Active Directory domain provided by Samba as the same way it is done for Windows Active Directory domain. Finally, we have the list of the continued and deprecated features. I'm not going to recall each one of the list, but for discontinued features, we can highlight that TLS1 and 1.1 are being discontinued. Then you have to upgrade to a version 1.2 or higher, no longer support for Power 7 and Big Indian Power servers. Therefore, you have to migrate to newer generation of Power systems. And storage enabler for containers is being discontinued, opening the way to CSI. On the side of deprecated features, we can highlight deprecated AX support to Power 7 systems, also plan to migrate to newer generation of Power systems. The use of Kafka with a Spectrum Scale is not longer necessary. So if you are using Kafka for other reasons not related with a Spectrum Scale, just install it a part of a Spectrum Scale because it's not longer needed in the installation. We have also deprecated support for volumetric DSM5. So now we are only supporting version 6.2 or later. So other important thing that we are deprecating is the primary and secondary configuration service functionality. Now, all the clusters are created using the CCR. So the default configuration service is CCR, and all the clusters created from now on are going to be used the CCR source. So that's all on my side. I don't know if you have comments or questions. Otherwise, I am returning the control to Christopher for the closing comments.
Sorry, Ismail, there was a question around block service provider replacements for iSCSI. Is there something else?
Okay. None planned right now, and like I said, Carl or Tom can chime in on stuff. But again, I remember our legal slide right in the first stuff. But yeah, MM block right, basically it was phased out. That's been done. So again, you can use regular iSCSI replacements, create a block device and sort of do that, but sort of bring in and tie that question on into others that has been going on in the chat. There is an RFE. Some of you have been talking about RFEs, right, on the various kinds of questions, right? Voting for RFEs. And Simon, like I said, I know that the community's kind of tried to have like maybe a voting kind of environment as well. The Tom, right, basically is basically going to be looking at all of this stuff in terms of direction for the product and making sure it gets voted on, right? If you don't want to be a public RFE, you can make a private RFE, right, and sort of get that to IBM. But again, there is this kind of feedback loop that you have into product management in terms of what we're doing for that. With that, other than maybe some futures and whatnot, are there other questions that we need to think about addressing here, Simon?
There's quite a lot of sort of futures questions in the questions that didn't hit.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's see, Stefan, you're asked about an online update of GPFS with Linux clients in an HPC cluster. So, oh, yeah, you want to do a swapping kernel modules of life. Yeah, RFE. So on that one.
So I saw a similar question around SMB doing online upgrades as well, without having to take all your SMB nodes down.
That's a function of Samba. When Samba gets, you know, that functionality, we'll be able to integrate that. But that's the not a scale limitation, but again, this is something with Samba. So I typically kind of keep track on the Samba kind of community and what they're actually doing. There are some projects that they were kind of doing to resolve that in terms of you know, availability, continuous availability for SMB there.
Does the watch folder API remain the same if the CAF goes changed underneath?
Let's see, what API remain? I believe everything should still be the same. I see the probably was on as well, but she can maybe help confirm that.
Everything stays the same.
Great. See, I paid attention. Anything else here, Simon? Try to just scroll up if we missed anything.
I was just looking back. There was a question around, is the GUI going to change to match how flash systems have been updated? I think that's about the look and feel of the GUI.
Yeah,
No,
I mean, again, go ahead, Steve.
no, we don't have plans for that, although IBM does tend to roll out the same look and feel for the GUIs, but right now, no.
I think my experience of that as a customer is it sort of rolls out and it takes about 10 years for everything to catch, but nothing's ever the same. There's a question about extended attributes in NFS v2. Is Spectrum Scale going to support kernel, like version 5.9 kernels?
Oh, I missed that one. Was that over you?
That was quite early on in the session.
Let me scroll up. CNSA. Dedupe. Okay, sorry. Extended attributes available in FW 4.2. So as I remember, when we did 4.1 last year for Ganesha kind of environment, I mean, there is a plan to investigate NFS 4.2 as well. But again, that's again roadmap futures as well, right? So we're, you know, again, when Linux kernels kind of changes the APIs, again, rest assured the development team is usually always testing that. And again, it's not something that, you know, we're caught flat-footed on. If there's a new kind of kernel, typically you can kind of load it in the test system and kind of see, you know, where things are breaking or working, right? So the intention is, again, is in newer kernels, again, to do that. The intention is to look at, you know, 4.2 support as well in terms of NFS and the Ganesha front end.
And then there was another question after that about are there plans to introduce other compression algorithms?
Check to do licensing chips. So yeah, typically I think, like I said, the compression algorithms we have there today, LZ4, ZLib, and some of the genomics ones were sort of done. I think that basically the algorithms were maybe more open. So that's probably kind of gaining traction for your algorithm. Depends on how open it is, right? If it's licensed, then we got to buy licenses for using that. Well, it's going to be challenging, but I mean, you do have an RFE for that, but it was rejected. I guess the rejection was probably because of the ZSTD compression license, perhaps.
So there was an update to the question about NFS 4.2. It was actually around kernel, 5.9 support rather than being about NFS necessarily. It was a sort of newer kernel support question.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So again, yes, testing new kernels is something that, again, the development team is always doing. So kernel 5.9 whatever the Linus decides to do, a 6.0 or 12.0, who knows? We'll be testing those.
And I see someone asked a question around if IBM remains committed to Spectrum Scale development for the long term, and that's been answered in the sort of questions around, yes, IBM remains firmly committed. In fact, 3 people have answered the question. That's how firmly IBM are committed.
I'll commit too. We're firmly committed. Yes.
Okay, I'm not seeing anything else that I don't think that's been answered that isn't a sort of a futures question. Yep.
Good. Well, I mean, like I said, we're kind of passing to you, Simon, to close it out. Thank you for everyone for your time today. Like I said, I hope this has been helpful. Again, love the user group that you have, and come to our next talks. Go ahead, Simon.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Ismail, for both speaking today, and thanks everyone for joining the call today. So, as we mentioned on our website, we'll post the slides, and we'll probably post the video from onto the YouTube channel. It'll just take us a little while to get those pushed up online. Chris has put up the Spectrum Scale Developer Edition slide, which I think is to remind us that there is a free version of Spectrum Scale Developer Edition, which is limited in the amount of space that you can use it for. Free for non-production use, so if you're testing or learning about Scale, it's a very good place to go. Somebody did ask me a question, how does Scale customers handle the disruptive decision by Red Hat to terminate or to change CentOS? I suggest that's probably a good question to take onto the Slack channel if people want to have a discussion around that. So yeah, please feel free to take that question over there as well. So I want to comment on the Spectrum Scale Early Access Program slide that you've got up, Chris, or Ismail.
Yes, no, like I said, we've always had beta programs that are there. You're always, I know, Renar, you've kind of participated. So you're all welcome to participate in the beta programs, alpha programs, early ship programs. Like I said, whenever we're doing, you're always welcome. Either to get, if you can't work with your IBM person to sort of get, figure out what to do, feel free to reach out to me or Ismail, right? scale@us.ibm.com, and we'll get you looped in there.
Thanks, Chris. So I think that's the end of today's talk. So as I mentioned earlier on, please check on the website, on the Slack channel, on the mailing list for the future dates for the next set of talks that we're going to be bringing up. And if you've got ideas for topics for talks that you'd like to hear, please, let us know, and we can see if we can find people to talk about those. And if you're a customer who's interested in talking about how you're deploying Scale or, challenges that you've seen with it, we're interested in having those types of talks as well. So please, get in touch with us, and we can look at when we can schedule that. So thanks everyone for joining today. And with that, I'm going to close the call up.